All right. Welcome, everybody. We are here with Jennifer Georgescu for our artist talk for July. My name is C. Meyer, and I am the exhibitions manager at Blue Sky Gallery in Portland, Oregon. I'm just thrilled to have Jennifer here. Thank you so much for joining us from Tennessee, but normally you are located in Basel, Switzerland. So it's great to have you with us today. Jennifer's series, Mother series, is up currently on our walls here at Blue Sky until July 30th. So if you're local, please come by. We'd love to see you. Come see the show. And you can also check out the exhibition through our website as well, with some install shots. So real quick, I'm just going to do our land acknowledgement statement. We at Blue Sky humbly acknowledge that our programming is being held on the traditional lands of the Multnomah, Cathlamet, Clackamas, bands of Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Molalla, and many other tribes who made their homes along the Columbia, Wimal, and Willamette rivers. In this online format, you may be participating from other areas, and we invite you to consider your own land acknowledgement that reflects your location. We also acknowledge that the very technology we rely on for these online programs is inequitably distributed and not equally accessible, creating new virtual displacements and exclusions. We call attention to the need for action now and the future to address these disparities. And real quick, I'll just introduce Jennifer. So Jennifer Georgescu is a multimedia artist whose projects analyze the dualisms that exist in language, relationships, mythologies, and control. Her lifelong interest in what makes us human is reflected by emotionally charged conceptual photographic constructions. She says, "I often search for the balance that exists between these dichotomies. This is how I view humanity, always teetering on the line between fiction and reality, domination and submissiveness, self and other." A U.S. artist based in Basel, Switzerland, her bodies of art have been published worldwide, including Lens Scratch, Ain't Bad, Don't Smile, the Missouri Review, Silver Shots, Shutter Magazine, and Photo. Recent exhibitions include the Athens Photo Festival, Startup Art Fair LA, the Oceanside Museum of Art, the Fort Wayne Museum of Art, the Baldwin Photographic Gallery, and Center for Fine Art Photography. And here's a quick snapshot of Jennifer's current exhibition here at Blue Sky. All right, I will pass it over to you, Jennifer.
Thank you, C. And I just quickly wanted to thank the entire committee of Blue Sky Gallery for working so closely with me to make this exhibition possible. I am a multimedia artist currently based in Basel, Switzerland, but I grew up in the foothills of Tennessee, specifically in Chattanooga. And from a young child, I always knew that I was meant to be an artist. And so I always kind of had this gift of a purpose. And I started out early on painting and always drawing. And I ended up going to an art high school, one of those magnet schools that are popping up all over. And it was there that I was introduced to photography for the first time in what was essentially a dark room in a closet, if you will. And so I really fell in love with the medium when I haven't stopped since. And so I really felt that while I was painting all of the time and photographing all of the time, somehow the two mediums just didn't feel quite right to me. And when I started college in Nashville, Tennessee, in Watkins College of Art and Design, I really had this idea that I was meant to somehow find a way to marry my two loves of painting and photography, somehow marry those two mediums together. And I was always experimenting with photography, and I always called myself a conceptual artist. I wasn't actually interested in conveying a reality. It was more of conveying the feeling of a situation. And I've always had this overarching theme to my work, which is what makes us human. And I've always really been drawn to that question since I was a small child, is wondering if we are different from other animals because we appreciate music or we appreciate art, or if it is our ability to appreciate beauty despite knowing that our life is finite and will end. And so I was experimenting a lot with long exposures and painting on my negatives and cutting them up and projecting on models and photographing that and painting that. And eventually I found something that worked, and it was this way of making photographs that I could paint with, and something just clicked. And so I would like to share a little presentation with you all. Let me share my screen real quick. And you all can see my screen. Can you see the screen? See?
Yeah, we can see it. Thanks, Jennifer.
And this is the show currently on view at Blue Sky Gallery Mother Series. And so in college, I started looking at artists like Dwayne Michaels and Ralph Eugene Meatyard and Sandy Skoglund, Simon Johann. And I was really drawn to their ability to tell a story and to kind of manipulate the viewer into feeling what they wanted you to feel. And I was very interested in that kind of photography and this kind of ability to tell a lie, but convey an emotion that is real. Joan Didion, we tell ourselves stories in order to live. Gabriel Garcia Marquez, life is not what one lived, but when one remembers, and how one remembers it in order to recount it. So I wanted to go back a little bit to some previous bodies of work, because you can really see the evolution of what I was thinking about and how I was creating it in order to understand how I'm creating Mother Series. So the first one I'm going to talk about is called System of Interdependent Terms. And in this project, when I started going to Watkins College of Art and Design, it was really on the cusp of when everything turned digital. And so I was still shooting with a medium format. And I became very interested in the ability in taking multiple shots and being able to kind of manipulate the space between figures. And so this body of work was created when I was going to be married to my husband. And I started wondering like what it is that allows us to truly know the interior of another person. And is it our language, or is it in nonverbal communication? And so I really was playing with this idea of the space between figures and allowing that space to contain some kind of communication. And I looked a lot to natural materials as a very basic form of communication, connecting the people. And then as language becomes more prevalent verbally, the message gets more abstracted. And so when I work, everything is very methodical and planned out, and even the lighting schemes are planned out beforehand. And I really enjoyed setting up these photographs so that they could later be scanned in to a computer and then painted, like seamed together. And so to me, I had really found my medium. I had found a way to paint with photographs. And that led me to start creating past, present with future projection. Going back to that overarching theme that I was talking about what makes us human or what makes us different from other animals. I started thinking about how in my family, we all are storytellers, that we sit around the table and we tell the same stories about, something funny or some event that happened over and over and over again. And some of us tell a certain story the best, but we've all heard them a million times, and we still laugh every time we hear them. And I started thinking about that. I started thinking about how the actual stories of the events had started to take the place of the actual events themselves. And I started thinking about how we have these stories about ourselves that function in this way, that we have very false accounts of our past, and time doesn't exactly exist in a straight line, and we are mostly the products of what we tell ourselves. And so I got my medium format again, and I started taking self portraits of myself, but in ways that they could never exist. I would take multiple photographs at different points in the day, and then later scan them in and seam them together to create these false stories or false portraits of who I was. And later, I started a body of work called Sandstone, Dead Leaves, and Bone. And in this body of work, I was referring back to that overarching theme. And I was, growing up in Tennessee, I was always very close with nature, and there's a lot of hiking and swimming and kayaking around here. And I started thinking about how humanity is a bit lost with where we fit into nature, and however much we long to be a part of it, we don't quite know where exactly we fit in anymore. And so I started taking these natural elements and kind of setting up these little mini sets and photographing myself with these elements that are at once beautiful and grotesque. And I became very interested in making photographs where we weren't sure if this person was longing to be a part of nature, or if nature is kind of trapping them or sucking them in. And this is an image of roses in my head. And so I'm still very much painting with photographs. And some of these shots are almost one shot, or some of them are 50, and that's not really the point for me. I'm very drawn to the performative action of it, and then creating the image in my mind through whatever means necessary. And about this time, I moved from Tennessee to the West Coast, and I was living in San Francisco. And San Francisco is known for being very, very hilly. And I lived at the top of this huge hill. I had to walk almost a mile straight up from the BART when I came home from work. And when I would turn around, it was just the most amazing view of all the most stars I had ever seen in my life. And I started thinking about the afterlife and what comes after life. And I've always kind of been drawn to, or I don't know, fascinated by what comes after, because I don't believe in anything. And I am very jealous of people that are religious, because it's this very wonderful thought, that life could go on and on. And I wish I could belong to a community like that, but I just don't believe in it. And I started to kind of think about a story or an event that would make me feel better about what comes after. And I was looking a lot to science fiction about the theory of parallel universes where time can exist on different planes at the same time. And I started thinking, well, wouldn't that be lovely if in this time zone, in this timeline, when I died, perhaps I could still exist on another plane. And I started creating this kind of science fiction tale where this woman eventually goes to the stars, and on this other plane, somebody made of stars slowly starts to become human. And I found this old lot of negatives on eBay, and they contained a lot of photographs, very early photographs of a man and his family. And I started combining us together. kind of create these fantastical situations between past and present, and making a time that wasn't really possible. This is one of the man. And it was also about this time that my husband and I had been married for 7 years, and we were starting to get older, and we decided we better, like, if we were going to have start a family, now was the perfect time. And I was lucky enough to be able to get pregnant. And so I waited the 8 weeks like you're supposed to, and went to my first ultrasound. And I was horrified to find that on the screen, there was no heartbeat. And I really hadn't considered that possibility. It was just more like, oh, can I get pregnant, and can this happen? And I didn't really know anyone that had gone through a miscarriage, and I didn't know how common it was. And I started thinking again about that timeline that we tell ourselves, the story about who we are and where we're going. And I I started going through this really horrible experience where my body continued to grow like I was pregnant, even though I wasn't, and my body just couldn't accept that it wasn't a viable pregnancy. And I had to go through rounds of the abortion drug, and they didn't work, and then I eventually had to have a surgery to remove the tissue. And so I felt like my body was betraying me, that I had this growing pregnant body, and how cruel it was that I couldn't be a mother. And it really threw me for a loop, because we have this idea of who we're supposed to be and what is supposed to happen. And it was one of the first times that I was just kind of slapped in the face with reality. And just because we will something to happen doesn't mean it's going to happen. And I I was going through a really hard time, and I I wanted to kind of create this space of calm where I could really stand back and reflect upon um, upon my feelings and what had happened. And I wanted to kind of create something beautiful out of something horrible. I wanted to see the beauty in the body, and the beauty of life not being in our control. And so I created these very calm spaces, and I wanted blood to look more like pomegranate juice or something more mythological. This is a bowl of milk with dead flies. And it took me a long time to get over those feelings, and I felt like I could try to get pregnant again, and luckily I did. Um, and so this pregnancy, I was very scared the whole time. I was really scared that I was going to lose it, and I had a scare where I thought I might have lost it. And I went from being a very active person to being 6 weeks pregnant and being unable to walk. I had all these very strange symptoms, and by 6 weeks, I was fully disabled and I wasn't able to work. And so I started, my journey of motherhood, feeling already feeling very displaced and very unlike myself, and kind of existing in this odd state of limbo of, kind of what's next. And luckily, I gave birth to a healthy baby boy. And um, I was really scared when I had him. I was just a little terrified when they gave me this baby, and they're like, okay, well, you can take him home, and you're just completely responsible for figuring everything out. And, I was prepared for the things that everybody tells you when you become a mother, and that, your sleepless nights and constant feedings. But what came as a surprise to me was that when you never have time to sleep, and you don't have any time during the day to even think, or eat, it was really shocking that I began to feel like this kind of shell of a person. At what point are you not you anymore if you really don't have time to think? And I was looking into my son's face for 24 hours a day and just being very grateful and seeing the beauty of of this gift, while at the same time feeling this immense sense of loss for myself. And of course, I found that very interesting, and this kind of push and pull, and this kind of love and loss. And I started photographing myself with my son when he was about 3 months of age. And so in the beginning, it was really me putting my ideas onto him and what I felt about motherhood. And as I said, I'm always planning out my images and planning the lights. And I really appreciated when working with babies and with small children, now that they're a little bit older, that they have added this inherent element of surprise, and they exist in these photographs in a way that I can't wholeheartedly control. And now that they've grown up performing for the camera, they have more and more of their own input in how they wish to be shown or how an emotion should feel or look. Um, and I found interesting that over time, I began to feel like my child was more of an appendage of myself, and that it was very hard for me to think of him having his own separate thoughts, and that one day I wouldn't even, I won't even know what's in that head of his. And um, I started thinking, back to that overarching theme again of what makes us human, and kind of my fear of not having a religion or having a sense of an afterlife. And I started thinking about how people have traditionally had children, as a way of living on, or as a way of leaving our legacies behind. And I started realizing how, that, um, motherhood kind of functioned a bit like a religion, that we keep these relics of our children, from their hair to their teeth, and sometimes even the umbilical cord, and how strange that all is. And um, when I see my children grow, it's almost day to day that I can see them changing so rapidly and growing so fast. And I could only help but look to myself and think that I must be changing this fast too. I just can't see it. And so I started thinking a lot about, where I'd come from and where I'm going to go, and kind of how it's almost as if I feel a bit more linked to time now. And so I'm very interested in kind of taking these symbols that are traditionally religious symbols, and kind of flipping them to meaning of something a little bit different that relates to my religion of children. And it's very apparent the manipulation of space in these photographs as well. It's just over time become my way of working, as you can see from past bodies of work, that the mother in these images never has an identity, and the child has somewhat of an identity, but it's really the relationship between the mother and child that is important. And I found it that when I was creating this work, that um, I didn't really see a lot of work being made about how I felt about motherhood, about kind of this push and pull, and this longing to be together, and a child learning how to be separate, and these kind of dark days that go along with the best days. And I felt that it wasn't really allowed for women to be able to say that being a mother is really a relationship, that if everything isn't just so, or if we say like today was a terrible day, this person's driving me crazy, then you're kind of seen as ungrateful, and I came from a place from being very grateful. And so I wanted to really create something that felt emotionally true. And so in this particular image, I had this print hanging up in my kitchen, and I thought it was very interesting. My young son was about 2, and he was looking at the picture, and he said, Mom, I really remember that happening remember when I was hanging from that wire and you were cutting those dresses with scissors. And it was very surprising to me, because anytime he had ever seen a photograph, it was true. And so he was starting to think that all these things that we were creating together really happened. And one thing I love about this project is that it keeps changing and it keeps evolving organically on its own. And I can't anticipate what I will be next year. And my role and demands as a mother are constantly changing. And I'm a stay-at-home mother, and so I'm with them all the time. And it's a very interesting project, that the feeling now is so much different than the feeling in the beginning, but some theme runs through them all, And I don't know if you can tell on all of your screens, but the color cast is intentional. And I was really drawn to kind of creating all of my own colors, like painting, because I was very interested in creating these kind of skin tones that were kind of halfway between life and death. And the mother is always kind of this very dated figure, and almost the children could be from any time, but the mother seems very much from the past. And I was thinking a lot about aged paintings and old photographs in our family albums. This is called Doves. I don't know if many of you know this, but when you crack open a sand dollar, I think it might be part of its vertebrae falls out, and every little bone looks exactly like a little dove. This one's called Honey. And so now my children are very involved in the process of making these, and it's kind of a joy seeing them be excited about, like, what photograph are we going to take today? What are we going to use? And when we're out walking and they see something very strange in the road, like a cool plant, or like an animal skeleton or something, that, hey, we should take that and we could use that in our photographs. And this one's called Roots. And I'd like to end with just a couple of quotes. What makes photography a strange invention is that its primary raw materials are light and time. John Berger. My advice is draw from life as much as you can stand to. That's where you really learn things and learn to express your real personal feelings. And don't worry about creating masterpieces or only drawing the pretty things. Look for the commonplace, the unnoticed details of everyday reality. To draw from life is to learn about life, but you need to be compelled by some inner need to fill the blank page. It's got to come from inside our crumb. And I would like to go back to my Zoom screen, and I would love to answer any questions if we have time.
Thanks, Jennifer. That was wonderful. I loved seeing your just past projects and being able to connect kind of your concepts through those, but also to see how that's evolved and come through in your Mother series now. And I also really love the connection you've made and been able to make with painting and photography. And for me too, I was also kind of at that place in college where I was in the darkroom, but then that's about when, in early 2000s, 2004, when digital was becoming. And so having that excitement for the processes, I definitely relate to that feeling of wanting to be of like a maker within the photographic and painting. So I love how you've been able to like bring those two things together for you. Um, but also with just like the vulnerabilities that you're talking about, not only these wider questions about what is it to be human, but like your own personal experiences and how you've been able to like create those narratives within your visual storytelling, which is really beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I had one question and then I have a couple from attendees. So I was curious if you see this project as you've talked about, you're collaborating now, I guess, with your two kids. Uh,
Mhm.
do you hope or do you see this continuing throughout as they grow up, and or is it kind of more like, do you think they're gonna like get tired of it or
I mean, that's just probably inevitable, that they will one day be teenagers and not have time for that anymore. But I at least, but our relationship will have changed so much even by then
yeah.
that I see the story continuing for as long as it can continue. And when our dynamic is, very much different, and they'll be away from me a lot anyway, that's just the natural way of the teenager. That, but I hope they will look back and just kind of see this beautiful thing that we did together. That they'll see me in those images.
Mhm. It's such a different way of thinking about like a family album, or as like you've talked about the sort of religion of motherhood.
Yeah.
For them to look back at that will be really special, I think. Um, so we had a couple questions from Lizzie Cleary. So when you talked about feeling like a shell of a person after you had your first child, has this project, through your exploration of self and other life and death, has it provided you with your own sense of being again?
Yes, definitely. I don't know if it was just the work itself, but I was talking about how the dynamic between mother and child just changes really month to month.
Mm.
And so in the beginning, motherhood is so physically demanding that it feels like you're sinking almost, that it is really that hard. It's like a form of torture in a way, that when you really don't sleep for years sometimes. And it's really hard to have clear thoughts during the day. You just kind of feel like you're walking around in this fog. And I think, like, once that initial intensity kind of dies down, and motherhood becomes intense in a different way, and it's not so physically demanding to where you can't think anymore. And so I'm with them all day and I'm very busy, but I feel like I'm a person, now. But I thought it was very important to share those initial feelings, because I hadn't really heard that before. And then the
Mhm.
more I started talking about it, especially when I was showing this work in the beginning, people were really reaching out, including my own mother, and were saying, like, well, yeah, that's how it is. It's kind of dark in the beginning. And I thought it was interesting that women or parents don't show, or don't, they don't say those things to each other.
Yeah, definitely. I think so much of our upbringing is this assumption that it's just going to be kind of as you said, as you've gone through your different stages of trying to have a kid and then having them, that it's always very surprising. And that yeah, what's the communication on this is just interesting to think about. Yeah, our expectations versus the reality when you're in it.
Mhm.
Yeah. Thank you for answering that. And the second question from Lizzie is to Lizzie, it appears that you use other living beings in your photos, like the moth, sand dollar, birds, skeletons, ferns, as symbols for life and death and self and other, and by extension, the relationships between these dichotomies. Can you elaborate on the symbolic role of these living beings? Or what they occupy, or maybe like choose one of your favorites to discuss a little more in depth.
Well, I think, that's why I kind of wanted to go back and show kind of the evolution of how I started working. And it's always been very connected to these natural elements, and using those as symbols to create communication. And so in the Mother series, they do look a little bit to kind of these iconic symbols of religion, like especially with like the dough, as in like the breaking of bread, and the body, or the color red is very symbolic throughout, that it's this very blood color. And It's more of, I think, yeah, it very much relates to time and, kind of this push and pull between here and there, and where we come from and where we go, and this kind of, these elements that are holding us together in a way that feels almost like too much. It's too much sometimes. And are these figures being held together, or are they trying to be apart? And so I'm very interested in these kind of tensions with symbols, the tension between the space between figures, and that's kind of can be interpreted in both ways at the same time.
Awesome. I also didn't know that about sand dollars, about the breaking it. So now next time I'm on the coast and I find a whole sand dollar, I'm like very curious. But it's like such a beautiful symbol as well, especially as you're talking about sort of this idea of religion and the symbology of, I guess Western, Christian religion is definitely more, you think about doves and all those like
Yeah, I think the sand dollar is used in Christian religion as a
yeah,
symbol. But what I thought was mentioning is like taking a skeleton and breaking its vertebrae and creating like it's a symbol of hope or of freedom, or and of life
like
itself. And
yeah. Hmm.
it's not so cut and dry. Like it means exactly this. It's just a space to be able to contemplate what it means. That's the important part.
Yeah, that's great. And that kind of leads into another question. This is by Ralph Wells, and he's curious if you can elaborate on your comments about sort of quote fiction in photography. I think as you were talking about your process, and he's curious how the viewer knows that you're viewing a fiction, or are they viewing a fiction, or is it something that you've made?
Well, I think that's what I love about it. What I've always loved about photography is even though we know not to believe it, we still somehow do. And that's why I was talking about my son with the photo on the wall that I remember hanging on that wire, that if it was a painting of him hanging on a wire, like no matter how realistic, he would say, that's a painting of me hanging on a wire. And that's what always kind of drew me more to photography. That was my way of painting, is a way of like painting with reality. And to me, I think they're pretty, they're apparent that they didn't quite happen in this way. But I'm not interested, I've never been interested in taking like a photograph that really happened. It's like capturing a moment. My way of working has always been like creating a set and painting it and putting up lights and sketching everything out days and days and days until I have the image in my head. And so I create photographs in the same way that I would create a painting.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. I think when you were talking about kind of process, I was wondering, for me, um, you plan some of the things out, like you were saying, lighting, and I'm curious when you've taken like lots of different shots and you're working, to like stitch all that together, do you come in with sort of that, this is the finished picture kind of in your head of what you want it to look like, and then just execute that? Or is there a lot more kind of push and pull of what you've created, or go back and have to rephotograph to get kind of the image that you have kind of developed in your mind?
Yeah, I feel like, well, I think because I've been working this way for so long
Mhm.
that most of the time it comes out the way that I think.
Yeah.
And sometimes it doesn't, and I just kind of end up throwing those away, that like it just didn't work, and I hoped it would work and it didn't. But um yeah, it's just I really like that part of it, the intense planning, and like, oh, I'm going to need an arm going like this, or I'm going to need, the light always has to come from this direction. Make sure that, and kind of swapping people out, like first I'm here photographed and then another person photographed, and you have to make sure that all of those will eventually fit together,
Mhm.
and being able to kind of paint them together in a way that is believable. Like you have to, it doesn't seem that way, but I'm actually on some of these, I'm painting and shading and changing the color for months before I have this kind of feeling that, oh, that's the look. But it's not, I say like it's not all about the process, because it's mostly about the image in my mind, that this image. And so sometimes, you know, in the image with the moth, I'm actually just laying a moth on his face, you know, and that was the image I wanted. And then some, you know, it becomes with the spider web, it's more complex. You know, I need a set, or I need a prop, or I create it any means necessary for the final image.
That's awesome. And I also love that you call it kind of the performative, like you're also performing when you're doing all of this, like creating and painting and all that together. It's great.
Yeah, I've just never, it's not it's like it starts out in an autobiographical place, but it kind of doesn't end up that way. And so it is more like a performance piece, like I'm performing the feeling of it. And
Mm.
then in the final piece, I do feel it. Like it's when I'm going through images, I kind of get this gut feeling like that's it. That's the one that makes me feel it, you know? And that's the joy for me. That's when I have that feeling that I actually was able to create something that was just complete fiction in my mind. Like that's the beauty of making it for me.
That's great. And final question, this is also from Ralph Wells. Is photography your primary creative response to your lifelong existential question, or have you found other ways of expressing that yearning?
Well, I don't know. I guess no, I don't. I always was meant to be an artist. Like, you know, if you asked me when I was 2 years old what I was going to do, it was be an artist. And I think it was just really, you know, searching for the material that I wanted. Like I was always creating, and I wasn't really drawn to sculpture. Like that wasn't it. I didn't have that feeling. And drawing did for a long time, and painting did for a long time. And then when I found this way of combining mediums, I never painted again, which was something very bizarre for me, because something that I felt like the dearest about my whole life was paint. And I never painted again. It just left me. And I say, because I am still painting, I'm just painting digitally, I'm painting with photography. And I like to tell people, it's like the only thing that I really miss now about painting is the smell. You can't do that digital, you know?
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, no linseed oil or turpentine when you're on the computer.
And probably much healthier now, though, at least.
Yeah, right. Well, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your projects and your current project with us here physically at Blue Sky. It's a wonderful exhibition. It's great to see them in person. So for those folks watching, like if you are able to get here by July 30th, it's a wonderful exhibition. And check out Jennifer's website as well if you're curious more about her previous projects and just to see what she's up to next. So thank you again so much for your time, and it's been a real pleasure to hear about your process and your work.